Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series by PharmaVoice. This episode was made possible by a sponsorship from Advanced Clinical. For more information on Advanced Clinical, please visit advancedclinical.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, editor-in-chief of PharmaVoice magazine, meets with Liz Lewis, chief counsel, specialty business R&D, and head of patient advocacy oncology at Takeda Pharmaceuticals.
Liz, welcome to the PharmaVoice WOW podcast program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be speaking with you today.
It's so great to reconnect with you after your 2018 PharmaVoice 100 honor. I'd like to get to know you a little bit better and talk about your unique position. You have a really cool title. It's the intersection of chief counsel and head of patient advocacy. Can you describe how you balance the two and how this came to be?
It's a really great question. People ask me all the time how I can do both, and particularly how kind of someone who runs a legal function also does patient advocacy. And for me, this just reiterates advice I often give women, which is to grasp the opportunities and be more concerned about the journey rather than the end game of the journey. And I don't think I ever would have had this opportunity if I hadn't really kind of allowed myself to progress on the journey a bit. So when I came in to Takeda many years ago, one of the things that I did was help build the company, the infrastructure from a legal and a compliance perspective for the launch of its first commercial product. And as part of that role, I worked with this emerging group, this advocacy group. It had been in existence before I walked in the door, and really got to learn the organization inside out. So years later, when the head of the organization transitioned away from the company to a new role, I had the opportunity to take this role on, having worked with them for so many years, having worked hand in hand to design their programs, design the function, really had a very good sense of what that function was, what it meant to the company, and even more importantly, a really strong vision of where I thought it needed to go into the future. In terms of balancing the two, which I think was the second part of the question that you asked, it isn't really that difficult to balance the two in that from an advocacy perspective, at Takeda, we're so focused on kind of putting the patient at the center of everything we do, then focusing on our trust with society, our impact on reputation, and then kind of having the business follow, that when you look at those elements, that's very consistent with kind of a legal framework and how lawyers think. So it's been easy for me from that respect to balance the two.
Let's talk about your role as the head of patient advocacy, since you just brought that up. You were there at the beginning, and I think it's so fascinating that you were there for the launch of the first commercial product, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit more as well. But how did you really form or transform the patient advocacy organization?
When I took the advocacy organization over, it was in like 2013, 2014, the organization was very similar to the way it had been when I walked in the door in 2002. In 2005, 2006, we had made some changes, but fundamentally this organization was relatively similar to the way it had been in the early days, but yet patients have changed so much in the year since 2002 in terms of their activism and what they demand. The external environment has changed dramatically, particularly from an industry perspective as we think about how we better embed patients in the development process. And the company had changed significantly, where we had gone from kind of a one-product company to then having been acquired by Takeda and growing and taking on additional products. And so when I took on the function, what I had really focused was how do you modernize this function, which has been such a strong part of who we are in oncology at Takeda, and continue to leverage that strength, but also help the organization continue to be really relevant to the company today.
Right, and as you said, there are so many factors that are influencing internal and external when we look at what's happening with social media and patient advocacy. These all have to play key roles in what you're looking at in terms of how you're continuing to refocus the organization, I would think.
It really does, but for me, yes, social media is important, but when I think about how we're refocusing the advocacy function and the importance of the advocacy function, it's not so much about social media, but it really is about how do we really appropriately embed patients in the development process. Because at the end of the day, if we want to develop medicines and get medicines approved that really meet the needs of patients, we have to truly understand what those needs are from the patients. And a big focus of what I've done with this group since taking it over has been focusing on kind of ensuring that we are close to the patient and that we really kind of understand what the patient perspective is from kind of early on in development through commercialization and marketing of these medicines.
Can you provide a couple examples of how you really are embedding the patient within the organization? Does it start in clinical trials? Does it start in the commercialization? Or is it all the way through the life cycle?
It really is all the way through the life cycle. And as I think of examples, I can think of examples that kind of carry us through the life cycle. So from an early development perspective, we have this example where we have a compound in phase 2 development, and we worked with an advocacy organization to do a prognostic patient journey mapping process. And what we really wanted to understand is for patient-reported outcomes, and as we're looking at outcomes, kind of what are the outcomes that matter most to patients? Kind of not the outcomes that you can kind of pull down and kind of understand and read about, but if you go in and interview those patients, what are the ones that they really feel are important? Then we were able to embed those outcomes in our trial design so that we will be able to get quantifiable data from those outcomes and really be able to measure it for patients. For one of our products that is approved and we have continuing studies through a registry, we actually have 2 steering committee members of that trial who are patients. One is a U.S.-based patient and one is an ex-U.S.-based patient. And I mean, these aren't just any patients. Particularly the one from the U.S., he was a retired physician, had been involved in clinical trials in his career, but they sit on the steering committee with the investigators and really help us design the trial, help with the direction of the trial, and provide that patient input. And then from a commercialization standpoint, and probably it goes into commercialization and then back down into earlier R&D, we have a PLC, or a Patient Leadership Council. And so we think about patients the same way we think about physicians, in that there are certain key opinion leaders, or we call them POLs, patient opinion leaders. And we have a council of these patient opinion leaders that advise us in our direction. And so we have a history of having some really frank conversations back and forth. I mean, I can tell you we don't always like what we hear. They might not always like what they hear, but we come to the table and talk about it and kind of really understand the perspective. And sometimes we're able to very easily integrate it into what we're doing. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging, but we have the conversation with the patients. We go back with them so they understand what our perspective is. And in this way, I think we can really get a good perspective from the patients.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I think these are great examples of how companies can really think about the patient and patient centricity. You've done some interesting things in support of patients. You raised some funds around multiple myeloma while climbing Mount Fuji. Tell us what that experience was like.
Climbing Mount Fuji was an incredible experience. I was there in my capacity as a Takeda employee, and this was a climb to raise money, as you said, for multiple myeloma. It happened in Japan, and of course Takeda is a Japanese company, so it really allowed us and me as a participant to kind of merge those kind of strong Japanese roots with the work that we do here with the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. I mean, I think we talk about patient centricity and being close with patients, but going on a climb like Mount Fuji where there were patients on the climb, kind of being in really close quarters with them, supporting them through the climb and in the cause. It makes the day-to-day work so much more meaningful and real.
Fantastic. And congratulations. Not everybody gets to climb to the top of Mount Fuji.
It was a fabulous experience. It is a long climb, and of course you get up in the middle of the night so that you can see sunrise at the top of Mount Fuji. But for me, the perseverance and the grit from these patients that were on the climb was really astounding, because it's not an easy climb, and it was really inspiring to be with the patients who were doing it also.
Wonderful. When you think about the longer term, what is your vision for your specific organization within the company?
It's a great question. As you know, Takeda right now is in the midst of some change after an acquisition. And so when I think about kind of where we are with the new Takeda, my remit, both on the legal side and the advocacy side, is continue to develop a really strong organization that evolves and innovates with the business and provides employees with the opportunity for robust development and kind of a place where they feel like they can really make a difference.
Fantastic, Liz. One of the things about this podcast series is really talking about what are some of the wow moments in the careers of the women I'm speaking to. Can you share a wow moment for you in your career?
I tend not to think in wow moments, but I tend to think in moments that kind of really changed the trajectory of my career. There are a couple pivot points in my career that have really kind of changed the trajectory, and those pivot points have always been not the things that I was necessarily looking for or striving for, but those kind of just like almost oddball things that came my way. In a couple instances, they were things that nobody else wanted because they were considered too hard or too difficult or kind of not necessarily something that would garner a lot of success or recognition. And those were the things that kind of were career-defining moments for me, because I was able to kind of take them on and knock them out of the park and really shape my career in a different way. We talked a little bit about my kind of coming in and taking on advocacy and really kind of helping to build that from day one. Day one when I walked in, it was something that was a really hard group to work with, because it was a group that nobody really had a strong vision from a legal perspective and kind of what it should look like. Advocacy, if you think back many years ago, was something that was emerging and kind of not as present as kind of patient centricity is today. And so kind of doing something from scratch that was very nebulous was not necessarily high on a lot of lawyers' lists, but yet it gave me the opportunity to really learn the function and take it over. But I would say even my involvement from my early days when I was in a law firm and working so closely with the pharmaceutical industry, that happened because when I started as a lateral at a Washington, D.C.-based firm that I was at, I kind of got the assignment when I walked in the door that none of the other associates wanted, but yet it launched me on this kind of amazing path in terms of working within the pharmaceutical industry. And so it goes back again to sometimes the biggest moments are not necessarily initially those wow moments.
Gotcha. Let's talk about your pivot from being in private practice in Washington, D.C. to join the pharmaceutical industry. What drew you into life sciences?
I had always been a healthcare lawyer from the day I started working after law school, and I started off more as a Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement attorney. I grew up in a medical household. I was the daughter of a physician. I grew up as a kid going to the hospital with my father all the time, going on rounds, going in with him when he saw patients on the weekend. And then as I got older, when I was in high school, I worked in his office. By the time I got to law school and I was interviewing at firms, I knew the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. I actually, in those days, it was HCFA, the Healthcare Financing Administration. I knew what a HCFA reimbursement, HCFA 1500 form looked like because I had done some of that. And I always knew that it was something that I wanted to keep close as I started practicing law. And so for me, being a healthcare attorney and being able to kind of meld my experiences growing up with where I was going professionally was exactly what I was looking for. And then with respect to the pharma industry, it just kind of happened as I started working with more and more clients. And I had a couple in particular that I worked very closely with that were here in the Boston area, and that was actually why I came to Takeda, then Millennium, in the early days, is because they both had recruited me to come in and work with the company. I came in initially as outside counsel and then very quickly transitioned to in-house counsel.
Fantastic. So it's been a really nice, as you said, trajectory for you. When I speak with women in the industry, I always want to know, how would you describe your leadership style? Because the answer varies. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you shape your leadership?
It's so funny because last week I was just at a leadership team meeting with one of the business units I support, and we did one of these exercises where you learn you understand your leadership style, and it shows you in colors kind of where you are from a color perspective, and it shows your kind of conscious and your unconscious leadership style. And so with that perspective, it's always kind of interesting to see how I might answer and then kind of think about what that said about me. But, my leadership style is I have always been kind of a very high energy leader. I value open communication. I value moving things along and being very, I don't want to say goal driven, but really kind of driven to kind of make a difference and get things done. I have never really been described as a very quiet leader or one that operates very slowly and methodically.
So would we describe you as a red then? Is that a fair assessment? In the color
very
wheel?
Good, because you got it. I am very red with a lot of blue.
I can see that. Now, I am a yellow, so there we go. That's funny. If you had to describe yourself in what word, you just said you're not plotting, you are action-oriented. What would be the one word that describes you best?
That's so hard. I think I go back to one of the words I just used before, is I tend to be kind of a very high energy person, a very high energy leader. If you're looking for other words, hard to come up with just one word. But I think another one of my hallmarks has always been that I'm enterprise and strategic thinker, that I, constantly looking across the enterprise rather than kind of looking at just one particular function.
That's awesome. And I think that's a very applicable right now in today's life sciences industry, because we've noticed that, silos do not work. So you have to have an enterprise vision almost to move the needle.
You do have to have an enterprise vision, and so for me it has always come naturally. I oftentimes will just be able to line up the dots in lots of different places. For years I thought it was because I sat in a legal function and I got the opportunity to work with so many different groups, but I don't think that that's it. I think that it really requires a level of curiosity and requires you to kind of step back from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to allow yourself to have kind of that broader perspective.
Yeah, not everybody can do it, so I do think it's a skill as well. So
yeah, I think if you do it, it seems easy, but then when you realize that it's not everybody can do it, it is a skill. I think it also requires a certain amount of empathy and awareness, because as you're thinking from an enterprise perspective, you also constantly have to put yourself in the shoes of others. Agreed. And understand that perspective, and that also can be hard to do. Agreed.
And you have to make yourself vulnerable sometimes as well, and that's not always easy for leaders to do. How would you define success for yourself?
Even though I'm very red and very action-oriented, people are really, really important for me. And so for me, when I think about success and I think about kind of the legacy that I ultimately leave, it is all about the people and those that I've developed, mentored, and trained over the years, and really less about myself, because I feel like those people are really the ones who will make, a huge difference and kind of are that legacy to the organization and the industry.
I think you're very humble, because I know that I have spoken to people who know you and are very inspired by you. So you have that. What has been one of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome, and how did you do it?
One of the biggest challenges that I've had to overcome is actually just thinking about where I am today. When I came into the organization, and if you've noticed through this discussion, never quite said how long I've been here, but I came into the organization in 2002. I never thought that I would be here so many years later, and the organization has changed in so many ways over the years, and I've changed too. And so a challenge for me has always been, how do I continue to be relevant? How do I continue to shape a role that's really meaningful for me? And it is the reason I've been here for as many years as I have had, because I have pushed myself to continually evolve with the company and to really grab new opportunities. And so many times people think of new opportunities as a promotion, and I'm not talking about kind of pushing for promotions. I'm talking about pushing for new opportunities that really shape your career and really round out who you are. And so, it's been a challenge to continuously push myself, but because of it, I've had these phenomenal opportunities along the way that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise, and have allowed me to be where I am today. So I have such an incredible role. Not only do I have this amazing legal role as Chief Counsel for all the specialty BUs and R&D, which is a global legal role, and then my Head of Patient Advocacy, which is just something I'm so passionate about and most lawyers don't get to do. I'm also the Takeda board member for Bio and Mass Bio, which gives me a policy role to my job, which I absolutely love. And so it's my biggest pride, but also my biggest challenge, which was kind of pushing myself to constantly be able to have these different opportunities and continue to evolve.
I think it's great. You really have developed a very enriched career. So let's talk about your board role at Bio, and how are you shaping and guiding the association, and how did you get to the board of Bio?
I got to the board of Bio. I'm one of the few non-CEOs who sits on the Bio board, and of course also one of the few women who sits on the Bio board. I had this opportunity because the head of our business unit was unable to take on the role, conflicted with a lot of meetings, and so I was able to step up. My role on the board is to really represent all of Takeda in the U.S. on those issues that matter most for the company. It gives me an incredible opportunity within Takeda. We talked a moment ago about enterprise thinking, and really being able to flex that enterprise thinking. It's really thinking about kind of what Bio's agenda is and how Takeda plugs into that and what's important for us. Within the matters on Bio, I have started my career as a reimbursement attorney, and everything old is new again. Now with the current focus and healthcare on access, that's a place where I've worked with Bio and Mass Bio. It's something that Takeda feels very strongly about, and of course is of personal interest and passion to me.
That's fantastic. When we talk to women, they often aspire to sit on a board. What are some of the key things that they need to think about?
So I would tell women, don't necessarily be particular about what board. A lot of it's about getting the opportunity to step up onto the board. And then the other suggestion I would give is to kind of really just jump in with both feet and participate and be active. I think every woman I have spoken with who has stepped up to a board has often talked about, and men too, that initial experience of feeling a little bit like an imposter, but just then kind of just diving in and really kind of learning the issues, I think is the way not only to have the best success on a board, but also to make it the most fulfilling.
Fantastic. Let's finish where we started, and that's about women. And I know that you are a passionate supporter of women. Why is mentoring others so important to you?
I want to differentiate here a little bit between mentoring and also sponsorship.
Sure.
For those of us in the biotech and the pharmaceutical life sciences industry, continuing to attract and retain top diverse talent is really, really important. And so for that to happen, I think there really needs to be two things. There needs to be mentorship and sponsorship. And I think of mentorship as when you take someone under your wing and you really help them progress. And I think that that's something as leaders we all are responsible for doing. Sponsorship is when you kind of aren't necessarily mentoring, but you're actively promoting someone within the organization to help them advance their career, providing them with visibility, opportunities, coaching along the way. And for me, both mentoring and sponsorship are important components. It's something that I work really hard to do with many others in the organization.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for spending some time with us. I've been fascinated by our conversation, and I want to wish you continued great success in your roles at Takeda.
Thank you for speaking with me today. This has been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series. And thanks again to Advanced Clinical for sponsoring this program. For more information on Advanced Clinical, please visit advancedclinical.com. We also encourage you to listen to additional episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2019 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.